Discovery class. Next week I'll be saying Happy New Year to you. Today's our last class in this strange year, 2020. Looking back now, what are your memories? What was different about this year compared to all the other years that you've faced? That's easy to answer, I think. We've had an enemy invade our nation. It started in another country far away, and then it came to our shores, and it spread from coast to coast. We've suffered thousands of casualties. Nursing homes of all places, suffered the most. They became the frontal attack. And then it hit our children at school. Then our places of worship. Then our restaurants, our sports teams, offices, airlines, even our prisons. I want to read a poem that I found this week, and it kind of sums up our year. 'Twas the days before Christmas, and all through the town, people wore masks that covered their frown. The frown had begun way back in the spring, when a global pandemic changed everything. They called it Corona, but it wasn't the beer. It didn't bring good times, and it didn't bring cheer. Contagious and deadly, this virus spread fast, like a wildfire that starts when it's fueled by gas. Airplanes were grounded. Travel was banned. Borders were closed across air, sea, and land. As the world entered lockdown to flatten the curve, the economy halted and folks lost their verve. From March to July, we rode the first wave. People stayed home. They tried to behave. When summer emerged, the lockdown was lifted. But far from caution, many folks drifted. Now it's December, and cases are spiking. Wave 2 has arrived, and it too is disliking. Frontline workers, doctors and nurses try to save people from riding the hearses. This virus is awful, this COVID-19. There isn't a cure yet, but there's coming a vaccine. It's true that this year has had plenty of sadness aplenty. We'll never forget the year 2020. And just around the corner, the holiday season. Why be merry? Is there even one reason to decorate the house and put up the tree when no one will see it? No one but me. But outside my window, the snow gently falls, and I think to myself, let's deck the halls. So I gather the ribbon, the garland and bows. As I play those old carols, my happiness grows. Christmas ain't canceled, and neither is hope. If we lean on each other, I know we can cope. As we enter 2021, let me give you a text that's full of hope. Pretend you're the Apostle Paul. You've been training a young assistant. He's traveled with you and he's looked over your shoulder as you've planted some new churches. And you're now in prison. Your life is coming to an end. Your young assistant is living far away now in the city of Ephesus. His name is Timothy. You've modeled Christian leadership for him, and you've showed him that personal leadership comes from the Lord. And you've shown that God calls and God judges, God creates and God guides, and our Savior saves and he heals. God corrects and he blesses. So if you're Timothy, you ask, what place do I play in this leadership? Paul tells Timothy, you must learn to be second place. Don't be bossy. Don't elbow yourself up front. If you let your ego get in the way, you'll betray your master. Form your leadership spiritually in the name of Jesus. That was Paul's style of leadership, encouraging and guiding. With that pep talk ringing in young Timothy's ears, Paul gives him a verse that he's practiced, and he's going to pass it on to this young assistant. And it's made up of 3 very strong verbs in the Greek. I fought, I finished, I kept. Let me read what Paul said in the last chapter of 2 Timothy chapter 4. I'm reading verse 7. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there's in store for me a crown of righteousness. Discovery class, you've just endured 9 months of a horrible pandemic. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't see anybody. All vacations were cut off. All church fellowship was halted. Families were isolated. No one could come to your house. Someone else had to shop for your groceries. Elective surgeries were postponed. You could hardly leave the garage with your car. You didn't FaceTime, but you couldn't, or you did FaceTime, but you couldn't hug anybody. If a loved one died, you couldn't even have a funeral. I haven't seen anything like this in an eternity. However, I think it's going to come to an end. I think there's a light at the tunnel. The year 2021 is upon us, and every one of you is still with me. I'm going to have you back in class again. I make that promise. I have 75 old hymn books on a kitchen trolley sitting in my office, waiting to be put back into your hands. Frida is waiting anxiously to be back at the keyboard of the grand to play. You're going to be sung to happy birthday and happy anniversary, and you're going to have your name on that. We'll have encore once again, with a full hot meal and outstanding speakers. We're going to take field trips again. We're going to go to Kananaskis. We're going to go to Canmore. We're going to go to Banff. We're going to go to Lake Louise, Rosebud Theater, and beyond. A vaccine is going to be distributed early in January. Because of your age, I want all of you to roll up your sleeves, and we're going to be the first in line. You and I are going to claim that verse the Apostle Paul just said in this brand new year, 2 Timothy 4, verse 7. These are actually one of the last words that Paul ever wrote. And he's sending them right into the middle of our discovery class, right now, as we begin all over again in the year 2021. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. Let me explain the meaning of these 3 verbs. I fought, I finished, I kept. The first one, I have fought the good fight. I didn't give up. You know, fighting has been a part of our society forever. When I was a student doing my undergrad work, I had a course on the Civil War in the United States. That was a horrible war. Do you know how many died in that war? 750,000 men and women. That's 750,000. Just in the Battle of Gettysburg, just a little village in Pennsylvania, just northeast of Washington. I visited there on our honeymoon. It was there that Abraham Lincoln delivered his Gettysburg Address. There were 150,000 soldiers fighting each other from the north was the Union Army. From the south, the Confederates. And they fought for 3.5 days. 150,000 soldiers. Do you know how many died? 51,000. That's more than all the war of Vietnam and the casualties that the Americans fought over there. And the little village of Gettysburg had every house become a hospital. And in those houses, the kitchen table became the operating room. And you could hear the squeals and the pain in the cattle farms miles away. And every shelf in that house that had a book, those books were drenched in blood because they were put under some of the limbs as they were removed. Now remember, there was no anesthetic. All they had was whiskey. And it was in that little village that all those houses became the hospital. I fought the good fight. It was a horrible war. People have been fighting ever since. But you know, we had a wonderful example this year in our church. In these last 3 months, we lost a giant. His name was Dr. Martin Lee. He was an eye doctor. He was the best eye doctor in the city of Calgary. I know that because he was my doctor too. He died of lung cancer. He was born June the 16th, 1955 in Hong Kong, China. Then his family moved to the United States and they settled in Oakland, California. He was 65 years of age when he passed away. Martin was an only child. He became a Christian at the University of Oakland, where he grew up with his parents. When he told his father that he'd become a Christian, his dad told him, he says, "You will never bring a Bible into this house." Martin loved his father and he obeyed. Martin did graduate from studies at Stanford University, and he went to get his doctorate at Harvard. He came up to Canada in London at Western University Hospital for research, and he took cutting-edge studies on becoming an eye doctor. He met his bride at a little Baptist church there, Wortley Baptist Church. His wife's name is Grace. You'll remember Grace because she plays the violin in our orchestra here at Brentview. Do you know what Martin got for his wedding gift when he took Grace back to California when they did their wedding? His father gave him a Bible. Martin brought his own bride back here to Calgary, and here he's lived all his life. And here he's come to Brentview for these many, many years. He has a young son. His name is Jeremy. He has a daughter-in-law, Jocelyn, and he has 2 children, McKenna and Joshua. Beautiful grandchildren. When Martin contracted lung cancer, I don't know of another Christian who ever fought the good fight and didn't give up. That man never missed church, even though he suffered for 3 years. He never missed communion. He never missed 2 baby dedications. As the cancer dragged and dug deeply into his lungs, Martin dug deeply into his faith in Christ. He began sending emails to his friends, giving an inch-by-inch account of how he felt, what the treatment was, how he was feeling. He worked at his doctor's office until just a few days before he passed away. At his funeral, he had a doctor colleague pay one of the most amazing tributes I think I've ever heard. He took the words like what I've just been telling you from Paul. He fought the good fight. Dr. Martin treated every one of his patients that he served as if it were the only patient he ever had. And this doctor who paid the tribute said, "I don't know of a doctor more thorough, more kind, more dedicated in his profession than Dr. Martin Lee." There are other doctors in the clinic And he said every one of those doctors became better at their profession because of Dr. Martin Lee. Could that be said of you? All of you that are in our discovery class, are the others better in our class because of you? Martin and Grace were in our class. Dr. Martin needs a replacement. Do you suppose you could step in and do his job? If you do, it'll be said of you that you fought the good fight. You didn't give up. Well, secondly, Paul uses the expression in the verb, he finished the race, meaning he completed the task. Many have become bitter. Many have become very discouraged. They've lost their job. Living has become living off their savings, fighting hard to pay the mortgage and their credit loans. Some have become very wealthy. The gap between the haves and the have-nots has grown even more in these troubling times. I was reading this week out of the Forbes magazine in their last publication this month. What they do every year, they list the most wealthy people in the United States. Sitting right now in the US are, guess how many billionaires? There's 651. Now, do you know what a billion is? A billion is 1,000 million. That's a billion. During the pandemic, their wealth of all these 651 billion has grown $1 trillion. Do you know how much a trillion is? That's 1,000 billion. Anyway, their net worth has combined now to over $4 trillion, these 651 billionaires. Here are the top 4 billionaires in the US. Jeff Bezos, Amazon fortune, $182 billion. Elon Musk, Tesla Corporation, all of those electric cars, $147 billion. Bill Gates, Microsoft Computer, $129 billion. And Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, $105 billion. Let me ask you, how did you finish the race? In a democratic society, when there's such a gap between the different levels of mankind. Discovery class, you finished the race. There's not a church in Calgary that has a discovery class I know of that's as faithful as you are. Even though I haven't seen you, you send your offerings into Brentview every week. You've never given up. Even though you're not to be found, you've picked up your phone and you've called a friend to see their happiness, just for another day. You got a letter, I got a letter this week from one of you that just turned 89. It's the nicest letter I think I could ever read. He wrote it from his nursing home. It was a vibrant letter. You would never know that he was in isolation or he couldn't see his family. And there in the letter was a generous offering for our church. He finished the race. He completed the task. Finally, the last verb in Paul's writing to young Timothy, it says that he kept the faith. What that means in the Greek is that he made it home. A man named Robert L. May, he was depressed, a little brokenhearted. He stared out his drafty apartment window in the chilling December night. His 4-year-old daughter, Barbara, sat on his lap quietly. Little Barbara couldn't understand why her mummy could never come home. She asked her daddy, "Why isn't Mummy just like everybody else's mummy, Daddy?" Bob's jaw tightened and his eyes welled with tears. The question brought waves of grief but it also brought anger. It had been the story of Bob's life. Life always had to be different for Bob. When he was a kid, he seemed to be bullied by the other boys. He was too little to compete in sports. He was called names that he would rather not remember. From childhood, Bob was different, and he never seemed to fit in. After completing college, Bob married Evelyn, whom he loved with all his heart. His first job was as a copywriter at the Timothy Eaton department store in downtown Toronto on Yonge Street. Now, I know that store very well because when I was a student at seminary in 1959, I was falling in love with a young girl by the name of Mary Aird. The first gift I ever bought her was at that store on Yonge Street in the Timothy Eaton store. Back to Bob. As a copywriter, he worked on the Eaton's catalog. Now remember this, every house in Canada at that time during the Depression had an Eaton's catalog. When I grew up, in our house, Mom would take the new Eaton's catalog and keep it in the house, and the old one was distributed to the outhouse. And it was there, it was in service. I never liked it. Paper was always shiny. I liked the Farmer's Almanac a lot better. Back to this. Bob held his job during that Great Depression. And it was then that he was blessed by this little girl. Evelyn delivered Barbara. But it was very short-lived. Evelyn's bout with cancer stripped them of all their savings. They had to live in a 2-room apartment in the poorest part of Toronto. Evelyn died December the 17th, 1938, just before Christmas. Bob struggled to give hope to that little Barbara. He couldn't even afford a Christmas gift, even though he worked at the big department store of Timothy Eaton's. He thought, if I can't buy one, then I think I'll make one. So he wrote his little girl, Barbara, a storybook. He wrapped it in a pretty little ribbon. And on the front page, he wrote very lovingly, "For my loving daughter, Barbara, Merry Christmas." Bob had created in his story an animal character in his own mind, and he told the story to Barbara to finish a very sad year. The animal character that Bob had created was a misfit, just like he was. His animal character was a little reindeer named Rudolph. He had a very shiny nose. Bob presented the book to Barbara on Christmas Day, and it was her only gift. And Bob read it to her over and over again, and she just loved it. Well, the general manager of the Timothy Eaton store caught wind of this little storybook, and he offered Bob May a nominal fee to purchase the rights to print the book. They went on to print Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and they distributed it to children visiting Santa Claus in the stores all across Canada. And by 1946, Eaton's had printed and distributed 6 million copies of Little Barbara's Christmas Gift. That same year, a major publishing house in the US, they wanted Eaton's to print an updated version of the book, and would they sell them the rights? Well, in an unprecedented gesture of kindness, the CEO of Timothy Eaton's returned all those rights back to Bob May. And that book became a bestseller. But the story doesn't end there. Bob had a brother-in-law by the name of John Marks. He wrote an adaptation of Bob's story and put it to music. Well, you know it. Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, had a very shiny nose. And if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. All the other reindeers used to laugh and call him names. They never let poor Rudolph play in any reindeer games. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa claimed to say, "Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?" Then how the reindeers loved him as they shouted out with glee, "Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history." Well, that song was distributed to two of the great vocals back in the 1940s. One was Bing Crosby, and the other was Dinah Shore. Neither one of them wanted to sing that at Christmas. They turned it down. But there was a man living out in California who was a cowboy. You know his name. His name was Gene Autry. He had a horse called Trigger. Remember that? And his wife was Dale Evans. That one. He picked it up and he said, "I'll sing it. I'll make that my Christmas song this year." Do you know, in 1949, it became such a phenomenon that it sold more Christmas records than any other song that entire year, including White Christmas. The gift of love that Bob May created for his little daughter so long ago kept on returning, a blessing to little Barbara and to little Bob over and over again. And you know, Bob May learned a lesson that day. Just like his little friend Rudolph, that being different wasn't so bad. He promised Evelyn, his wife, before she died, that he was going to finish the race. He was going to keep the faith, and he was going to make it home. Well, he kept his word. In fact, as I read the story, being different really can be a blessing. Discovery class, this being our last class in the year 2020, I want you to take hope. I want you to claim that verse that Paul gave to young Timothy. I fought the good fight. I didn't give up. I finished the race. I completed the task. I've kept the faith. I made it home. Now there's in store for me a crown of righteousness. Before I let you go, I must tell you a little story from the sunny side of the street. I've been closing my classes with a smile, and I want to put a smile back on your face. Mahatma Gandhi, you'll remember him. Mahatma Gandhi was to the country of India what Nelson Mandela was to South Africa, and Martin Luther King was to the US. He led that country back to their independence, and they gained their countryhood. They became a country under Mahatma Gandhi. Now, Mahatma Gandhi, as you know, walked barefoot all his life. And he had calluses on his feet, just about as thick as a camel's knees. Now, along with his callus on his feet, he also had a strange eating habit. He used to eat the strangest food. And as a result of that, he would produce a rather frail and odd little man, but he suffered from bad breath. So picture it. Here he had calluses on his feet, on the bottom, and he had bad breath at the top. Now, you've heard the song Mary Poppins, and there's a new word in there that they coined. It was called supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Well, here's what Mahatma Gandhi suffered with those calluses on his feet and his bad breath. He had a super calloused, fragile mystic hex by halitosis. That's the joke. When I was a student back in high school, I studied German, and I always sat at the back of the class. And I used to pride myself in making up German words. Here's one I made up. Have you ever heard of a Bier, Bauer, Ibisissen, Snorkelsiff, Gesellschaft? Neither have I, but it was a cute word. That's enough for today. You can see behind me the tree. I'm sitting in the lobby at the church and there's nobody here. I'm the only one. But I'm going to assure you that we're going to soon be back in our classroom and you're going to be there with me. And when you come, I want you to know we're going to celebrate like we've never before. I just can't wait to see you. But until as we get into the new year, imagine, it's going to be next year when I see you again, because this is the last Sunday of 2020. So to all of you, Happy New Year.